You're listening to a special recorded edition of The World Tonight with Robin Lustig. We're at the foreign policy think tank Chatham House in central London to discuss immigration. The coalition government has pledged to cap immigration levels to reduce the number of immigrants coming to the UK from hundreds of thousands to tens of thousands. You only have to look at the opinion polls to see why. According to one recent survey, when voters were asked to list Tony Blair's biggest failures during his decade in Downing Street, nearly two-thirds said allowing immigration to rise to unacceptable levels was top of their list. So, before I introduce our panellists, let's look very quickly at some numbers. The number of people who came to the UK last year to live here for more than 12 months was 567,000. Of those, nearly a fifth were British citizens returning home, and more than a quarter were from the European Union, so they had an automatic right to live here, just as Brits have an automatic right to live in France or Spain, for example. Of the rest, 30% came from Commonwealth countries and 23% from elsewhere. Now, if you deduct from that total number the people who emigrated from the UK, both Brits and non-Brits, you get a net immigration figure of 196,000. That's about 30,000 more than the previous year, but it still represents only about 0.03% of the total UK population. But of course, this discussion isn't only about numbers. It's also about culture and identity. It was Margaret Thatcher back in 1978 who spoke of some British people's fears that they might be rather swamped by people of a different culture. And in many towns and cities, that remains a concern today. On the other hand, who would staff the hospitals, the trains, the buses? Who would open the corner shops if we did crack down on immigration? Are there economic benefits that outweigh the potential social costs? Well, our panellists tonight are Trevor Phillips, the head of the Equality and Human Rights Commission, David Frost, the Director General of the British Chambers of Commerce, Srila Flather, Baroness Flather, who was the first Asian woman to receive a peerage, and Douglas Murray, Director of the think tank, the Centre for Social Cohesion. Now I'm going to ask each of you to make an opening statement of no more than 2 to 3 minutes. We'll then hear from our invited audience. Trevor Phillips, you're first.
Robin, thank you. This is not a peculiarly British problem. There are 200 million people across the globe who live and work outside the country of their birth. So we first have to think about this for what it is. I'm sure that as the evening goes on, we will become more and more unreasonable with each other, but I'd like to start with a few truths, inconvenient or not. The first brutal truth is that the European workforce will decline from well over 200 million people now to fewer than 180 million by 2060 without immigration. It is impossible to imagine Europe competing in the 21st century world with an aging, de-skilled and shrinking population. So the question is not whether we have immigration, but how we manage it and its consequences, economic, social and cultural. That immigration is now an economic issue was recognized by the shift to a point system which no longer asks the racial question that my parents faced when they came to London, where do you come from? The system now asks instead, what are you bringing by way of skills, capital and contribution to our economy? And I think that's progress. The fiscal negatives of immigration are often exaggerated, but even so, they're dwarfed by the benefits of growth, maybe 2% a year, according to the Treasury. And maybe that's one reason why the forecast of 3 million plus unemployed never materialized in this country. In effect, what we've done is export some of our unemployment back to Eastern Europe. And the overall effect on wages, much talked about, has been shown to be marginal. Now, I think more significant are the social costs. Pressure on schools, health services and above all housing. We need to support areas that are changing rapidly. We need to help migrants to learn the language and the rules of the communities they're joining. We need to prevent discrimination, but we also need to tackle illegal immigration and trafficking. Finally, there's a cultural effect that you referred to, Robin. The Equality and Human Rights Commission's triennial review, recently published, showed that British tolerance is remarkably resilient. We're good at integration in this country. We have no successful far-right anti-immigrant party here, but let's not be complacent. Extremists aren't going to take over the pitch, but we have to keep a keen eye out to make sure that they don't move the political goalposts.
Okay, Trevor Phillips, thank you for that. Next, David Frost from the British Chambers of Commerce.
One of the most noticeable things that I've seen in recent years has been the growth and the use of migrant labour by British business. And migrants have made an enormous impact on the UK labour market, in particular those that have arrived from Eastern Europe. They've moved into every part of the UK and are working in every size and sector of company. And when I ask companies, literally from Aberdeen down to Brighton, why they employ migrant labour, I get the same two reasons. One, they have far better skills than local people, and they have a better attitude to work than many. And our research would indicate that 1 in 4 of our member businesses employ a migrant. Now, as regards government policy on migration, it is clear that the Coalition has a mandate to really reduce the number of migrants. Our concern is that by doing that, we do not want to see the UK economy harmed. In particular, we are concerned about a cap on skilled migrants. This is a country that trades globally. We are the 6th largest exporter and importer of goods, and we are the 2nd largest investor in foreign markets. We need access to global talent if we are to remain a successful global economy. Now, finally, the impact of migrants on entrepreneurship. The government has just announced that it's going to introduce what's termed an entrepreneur visa to encourage entrepreneurs with financial backing to settle in this country. This has to be a very welcome move, as we need more entrepreneurial talent in this country, and we need as much as we can get, particularly in those regions in the north of the country which have low levels of enterprise. So we believe that the use of migrant labour over recent years has been an enormous benefit to British business and the UK economy.
David Frost, thank you. Srila Flather.
Thank you. First of all, we have to recognize that people are worried in this country about the numbers of people coming in as immigrants. And because of that, something has to be done. The question is what? And at the moment, the government has decided to stop the people, reduce the number of skilled people coming into this country to take skilled jobs, and then tier 2, who are actually sponsored by companies to come here. They have also said, the government's also made it quite clear, Damien Green has made it quite clear, that they will be looking at all routes of immigration, and they will also be looking at the abuses of immigration, because for me that is probably the most important area that we need to deal with, that if people are breaking the rules, that should be stopped. Now, I have 3 points to make. First is about the cultural benefit of immigrants coming to this country. At least one person on this panel remembers the Swan Report. And there was a chapter, a second chapter, which expressed entirely my view, which was that British culture will change, will actually grow and encompass the new cultures, the other cultures, and will be dynamic and vibrant as a result of it. Now, this was in 1984, and what I have found is that it's happened very quickly. I mean, the British culture now is encompassing other cultures. I mean, we are one of the most vibrant cultures in the world. People come here, they can actually experience almost everything that's available. So I'm not sure that stopping skilled workers or stopping immigration to some extent will make any difference to our cultural viability. I think we have it all and we will continue to have it. My second point is that we are not considering the sending societies. We are attracting the most skilled people from countries which can ill afford to lose them. And Africa is already very worried about losing people who are skilled to Europe, because, of course, the opportunities and the salary, etc., is much more attractive. There are institutes of technology in India, and they're very difficult to get into. They're the most important institutions that people want to get into. And one of them found that they hadn't a single graduate left because they'd all gone abroad. And I think we have to consider the needs of the sending countries. I think it's very wrong of us to attract the best people from the countries who most need them. That my third point, which I think is probably most important, is because of these people coming in and making it possible for the British business to just acquire people from abroad, they have not worked hard enough to skill our own people. And of course, it is a hard job. Isn't it easier just to bring somebody in and employ them? But unless people here, the businesses, start skilling the British people, there will be no change in this country. We have to have a skill base of our own, and maybe the government stopping the skilled people coming in is the only way that the businesses will recognise their own responsibility.
Thank you very much. Douglas Murray from the Centre for Social Cohesion.
Well, thank you. It's a great pleasure to be here. I was reading just this morning, again, a great favourite piece of mine by the American journalist and writer Tom Wolfe, a famous piece, Radical Chic, he wrote in the late 60s, about a party at the house of Leonard Bernstein and his wife for the Black Panther leaders. It's a wonderful, wonderful piece. But one of the interesting things that stood out to me again was this moment when Bernstein himself is questioning this Black Panther leader, and he says to him, but what happens when you've pulled down the whole state, when you've sort of destroyed the economic capitalist system and so on? He says you can't put a blueprint on the future. Bernstein says, you mean you're just going to wing it? Well, immigration policy in recent decades in Britain has been exactly that. And it's quite a striking thing to wing, because it's not only an economic question. Quite often you hear the debate about migration, immigration, solely spoken about in economic terms. But it's about far more than that. It's about identity. It's about people feeling they have a home. It's about not being limitlessly open to immigration from around the world. If you're a first world country these days, of course, you're a desirable destination for almost anybody in the world. You have to have, obviously, some limits. Now, Trevor Phillips said, among the questions that come up are, well, who would do the jobs? Well, we have 2.5 million people unemployed in this country. There are plenty of people who could do the jobs. John Prescott recently got that extraordinary answer from a young woman he interviewed who said, no, I'm not working class, I ain't never worked. We have, and we should face up to it. An underclass that has never worked doesn't know that it ought to work. We have to do something to get these people back into society. And the second fallacy, quickly, is the idea that we have to keep on importing a working class because people are getting old. Well, I hate to break it to you, but migrants become old people too. And if you are going to keep on bringing in larger and larger numbers of people to provide that workforce for that aging population, it will be limitless. Very briefly, one of my favourite current thinkers, a great German Muslim thinker called Bassam Tibi, a few years ago came up with this concept he described as the Leitkultur, a core culture. The importance in any country, any nation that's going to bind together, of having a core culture around which all sorts of variations are possible, almost limitless variations, but that they are only possible if people know what the theme is. And if there is a problem in Britain today, it is that the British people sense, of all backgrounds, they sense that Britain has lost its theme. If we do not have a unifying theme, I very much worry about the same things that Trevor Phillips mentioned at the beginning. He said that the British people are remarkably tolerant. I agree. But that tolerance will not be boundless.
Douglas Murray, thank you. I'm going to ask the audience for questions in a second, but there are just a couple of points I would like to take up very quickly. Trevor Phillips, you talked about the need to manage immigration. Our theme really tonight is trying to weigh the balance between what are very often described as the economic benefits that immigrants bring with what many people perceive to be the social costs. Do you believe that one of the difficulties in this debate is that the people who benefit economically from immigration tend not to be the same people who experience the social cost?
I think that historically is one of the problems. I suppose what you're really asking is, does people who, as it were, have Filipino housekeepers and bosses who have low-paid Polish graduates working in their factories, love immigration because it benefits them.
I mean, to put it at its bluntest, it is sometimes said that your attitude to immigration is pretty much determined by whether you hire them or compete with them.
Yeah, I think that is probably true in certain areas and very much in the short term. But one of the remarkable things that's happened in the last 20 years is that overall the attitudes of the British people to immigration have been transformed. And it's led to a very peculiar, what we call an immigration paradox. If you ask people